In the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, where silence can mean survival and patience becomes a weapon, Staff Sergeant Rebecca Hayes learned that some battles aren't won by the loudest voice or the fastest trigger. They're won by the person willing to disappear into the landscape and wait 3 days for a single perfect shot. This is the story of a duel that redefined what it means to be invisible, where two of the world's deadliest marksmen faced off across a valley that became their chess board, their arena, and nearly their grave. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The forward operating base Blackwater sat like a concrete tumor against the rust-colored mountains of Kunar province. Its walls were streaked with dust and diesel exhaust, its guard towers crowned with razor wire that caught the morning light in sharp, unwelcoming flashes. Inside the operations bunker, the air conditioning wheezed against the Afghan heat, and fluorescent lights flickered over maps that had been marked, erased, and marked again so many times the paper had begun to wear thin. Rebecca Hayes stood at hand. The back of the briefing room, her rifle case propped against the cinder block wall behind her. She had arrived 20 minutes early, as always, and had chosen the spot where she could see everyone without being the center of attention. Her name. Tape reads simply Hayes in black letters on desert camouflage. No rank insignia caught the light. No medals drew the eye. She carried herself with the economy of movement that comes from years of understanding that being noticed often meant being dead dot at the front of the room. Major Thomas Brennan shuffled through intelligence reports while junior officers filed in with coffee cups and notepads. Brennan was a career infantry, the kind of officer who had earned his rank through aggressive leadership and decisive action. His voice carried the confidence of someone who had never questioned whether the next hill was worth taking. He glanced up once as the room filled, his eyes passing over Hayes without recognition before returning to his papers. "Gentlemen," Brennan began, then caught himself with a slight frown. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem." The wall-mounted screen flickered to life, displaying a topographical map of the Korangal Valley. Red circles marked known insurgent positions. Blue squares showed friendly forces. Between them stretched a corridor of green terrain that looked deceptively peaceful from satellite altitude. Intelligence reports a high-value target has established a position somewhere in this grid square. Brennan continued, using a laser pointer to highlight a section of mountainous terrain. Call sign Phantom. Syrian national, former military sniper. Credited with at least 15 confirmed kills of coalition forces over the past 6 months. We believe he's responsible for the death of Sergeant Martinez last week and Private Johnson the week before that. Hayes had known both men. Martinez had been a good soldier with 3 kids back in Texas. Johnson had been 19 years old and still sent letters home to his mother every Sunday. She felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with personal stakes, but her expression remained neutral. Around her, other soldiers shifted in their chairs or exchanged glances. She remained still. "The problem," Brennan continued, "is that this bastard is good, very good. He's mobile, disciplined, and patient. Our usual tactics aren't working. Every time we send a patrol into his area of operations, someone doesn't come home." Captain Luis Rodriguez, the unit's executive officer, raised his hand. "What about air support? A few Hellfires might convince him to relocate." "Already tried. Weather's been too unpredictable for reliable air ops, and this guy is smart enough to stay under cover when he hears rotors. We need boots on the ground for this one." Lieutenant Sarah Chun, fresh from sniper school at Fort Benning, leaned forward in her chair. "What's our intelligence on his position?" "That's the challenge. He moves constantly. Uses natural camouflage. Never fires from the same position twice. The only pattern we've identified is that he seems to prefer elevated positions with clear fields of fire and multiple escape routes. Brennan gestured to the map again. Textbook sniper methodology. Hayes studied the terrain features visible on the projection. The valley was a maze of ridgelines and draws, with elevations ranging from 4,000 to 8,000 feet. The vegetation was sparse at higher altitudes, but thick enough in the draws to provide concealment. Rock formations offered both cover and elevated shooting positions. It was sniper country, the kind of terrain where one person with the right skills could control square miles of territory. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, team leader for the unit's designated marksman section, spoke up. "How many shooters are we talking about deploying? That's what we need to discuss. Our usual approach would be to send a full squad with Overwatch support. But every time we put that many people in the field, this guy melts away. We need to think differently." Brennan's eyes swept the room again, this time stopping briefly on Chun. "Lieutenant, you're our newest qualified sniper. What's your assessment?" Chun straightened, clearly pleased to be consulted. "Based on the intelligence profile, I'd recommend a two-person team. Shooter and spotter. We establish a hide position with good observation of his likely firing positions and wait for him to make a mistake. Aggressive. I like it." Brennan nodded approvingly. "Torres, can you put together a team?" Hayes watched the exchange with practiced patience. She had been through this before. The newest, most eager sniper would be given the high-profile assignment. The veteran would be overlooked, relegated to support duties or routine security patrols. It was a pattern she had seen repeated throughout her 8-year career. Torres glanced around the room, his eyes settling on Chun. Chun's got the most recent training. Her marksmanship scores at Benning were outstanding. Excellent. Chun, you'll be the primary shooter. Torres, you'll spot. Intelligence suggests that this phantom character operates primarily during daylight hours. So you'll insert before dawn and establish your position." Hayes remained silent. In her mind, she was already analyzing the tactical situation. A two-person team would be mobile but vulnerable. The enemy sniper had home field advantage, knowledge of the terrain, and the luxury of choosing when and where to engage. The standard approach would likely result in a stalemate at best, casualties at worst. "Questions?" Brennan asked. Hayes raised her hand. Brennan looked surprised, as if he had forgotten she was in the room. "Yes, Sergeant? Has anyone considered that this might be a trap?" The room fell quiet. Chun turned in her chair to look at Hayes directly, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes betraying irritation at the challenge. "Explain," Brennan said. "If this sniper is as professional as the intelligence suggests, he knows we'll eventually send counter-snipers after him. The pattern of kills, the timing, the locations, it's possible he's deliberately drawing us into his preferred engagement area." Torres frowned. "You're suggesting he wants us to find him?" "I'm suggesting he wants us to think we're hunting him, when he's actually hunting us. The valley terrain favors a defender who knows it well. If we send a two-person team into his backyard, we're giving him exactly what he wants, a small, isolated target." Chun's jaw tightened. "Are you questioning the mission parameters, Sergeant?" Hayes met her gaze evenly. "I'm questioning whether we're thinking like prey or predators." Brennan held up a hand before the tension could escalate. "What would you recommend, Hayes? Single operator, no spotter. Approach from an unexpected direction. Don't try to outgun him in his preferred engagement area. Force him to fight on our terms." The suggestion hung in the air like smoke. Traditional sniper doctrine emphasized the two-person team for good reason. The spotter provided security, navigation assistance, range estimation, and target identification. A lone sniper was vulnerable, isolated, and operating without backup. "That's not standard procedure," Chun said. "Standard procedure hasn't worked so far," Hayes replied quietly. Brennan studied the map again, his finger tracing potential approach routes. "A single operator would be harder to detect, but the risk factor increases significantly. The risk factor is already significant, Hayes pointed out. We've lost 2 good soldiers to this guy. If we keep doing the same things, we'll keep getting the same results. Rodriguez looked skeptical. And you think you can succeed where a standard team might fail? It was a loaded question, and everyone in the room knew it. Hayes had spent years avoiding this kind of spotlight, preferring to let her work speak for itself. But something about the tactical situation demanded honesty. I think I know these mountains. I've been operating in this province for 3 deployments. I know how sound carries in the thin air, how the light changes throughout the day, how the wind patterns shift with elevation. Most importantly, I know how to wait. The last point carried weight that the others might not have fully grasped. In sniper warfare, patience was often more valuable than marksmanship. The ability to remain motionless for hours, to ignore discomfort and boredom, to wait for the perfect moment, even when every instinct screamed for action. These were the skills that separated the exceptional from the merely competent. Brennan looked at Torres. What's Hayes' qualification status? Current on all systems. Marksmanship scores are consistently in the expert range. She's been deployed as a designated marksman on 17 missions over the past 18 months. No missed targets. No compromised positions. The room was quiet again. Hayes could feel the weight of evaluation, the unspoken calculations being made about her capabilities versus the risks involved. She had learned not to advocate too strongly for herself. Officers tended to interpret confidence as arrogance when it came from enlisted personnel, especially when it challenged their predetermined plans. Chun, what's your opinion? Brennan asked. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It was a diplomatic question, giving the lieutenant an opportunity to either support the unconventional approach or defend the standard methodology. Chun's response would reveal as much about her character as her tactical thinking. I appreciate Sergeant Hayes' experience, Chun said carefully, but lone wolf operations go against everything we learned in sniper school. The 2-person team exists for a reason. Without a spotter, you're blind to threats from other directions. You have no backup for equipment failure. If something goes wrong, there's no one to call for extraction. Hayes nodded. All valid points. But if we're dealing with a professional who's been studying our patterns, our standard operating procedures become predictabilities he can exploit. So we improvise? Chun's tone carried a hint of skepticism. We adapt. Brennan walked to the map and studied it for a long moment. The room waited. Hayes could hear the air conditioning cycling, the distant sound of helicopters somewhere outside the bunker, the quiet scratching of pencils as junior officers took notes. Here's what we're going to do, Brennan finally said. Chun, you and Torres will establish a primary observation post here. He pointed to a ridgeline that offered good visibility of the valley floor. Standard 2-person team, by the book. Hayes, you'll operate independently as a roving element. Your job is to patrol areas that the primary team can't observe. It was a compromise solution, the kind of middle ground that often satisfied no one, but avoided the appearance of choosing sides. Hayes would get her single operator mission, but in a support role that minimized political risk for the officers involved. Rules of engagement? Hayes asked. Observe and report. If you identify the target, call it in. The primary team will take the shot. Hayes felt a familiar frustration but kept it from her expression. She was being relegated to the role of scout, while the actual mission would be executed by others. It was a pattern she had experienced throughout her career. Her ideas would be adopted, but the credit and responsibility would flow to someone else. Understood, she said. The briefing continued for another 20 minutes, covering insertion routes, communication protocols, and extraction procedures. Hayes listened with professional attention while mentally preparing for a mission that would likely unfold very differently from the official plan. She had learned to work within the system while preparing for the moments when the system inevitably broke down. As the meeting concluded and officers began filing out, Hayes remained in her chair. She wanted to review the map more carefully, to study the terrain features and elevation data that would influence her approach. The room emptied until only she and Brennan remained. "Something else, Sergeant?" Hayes stood and approached the map. "Permission to speak freely, sir." "Go ahead." "If this Phantom is as good as the intelligence suggests, the primary team is going to be in significant danger. They'll be operating predictably, in a known pattern, with equipment signatures that he'll be trained to identify. He'll see them coming." Brennan crossed his arms. "And you think you can do better?" "I think I can do it differently. Sometimes that's enough." He studied her for a moment, and Hayes had the impression that he was seeing her clearly for the first time in the 3 months since she had been assigned to his unit. "Hayes, your record shows consistent performance, but you've never requested high-visibility assignments. You've never pushed for advancement opportunities. Why now?" It was a fair question. Hayes had built her career on competence without ambition, on being the reliable soldier who got the job done without seeking recognition. Her sudden willingness to volunteer for a dangerous solo mission was inconsistent with her established pattern. Because Martinez and Johnson deserved better than they got, because this isn't about careers or credit. It's about stopping someone who's killing our people. Brennan nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But understand that this mission will be closely monitored. If things go wrong, if the unconventional approach fails, it'll be your responsibility." "Understood." "Sir." "Good. Get your gear ready. Insertion is at 03:00 tomorrow. You'll have 72 hours to locate and eliminate the target. After that, we extract all elements and reassess." Hayes gathered her rifle case and headed for the door. As she reached the threshold, Brennan called after her. "Hayes?" She turned back. "Don't make me regret this." "No, sir, I won't." But as she walked through the corridors of the operations bunker, Hayes knew that the success or failure of the mission would depend on factors that had nothing to do with regret or official approval. It would depend on her ability to become invisible in terrain where visibility meant death, to outthink an opponent who had already proven his superiority over conventional tactics, and to maintain perfect discipline during what could become the longest 3 days of her life. The mountain war was about to become personal. The armory at Forward Operating Base Blackwater never slept. Fluorescent strips cast harsh shadows across rows of weapon racks, ammunition lockers, and maintenance stations where soldiers cleaned their rifles with the mechanical precision of people whose lives depended on function over form. Hayes pushed through the heavy steel door at 2,100 hours, 8 hours before her scheduled insertion. The night shift armorer, Specialist Danny Kowalski, looked up from a disassembled M249 machine gun spread across his workbench. "Evening, Sergeant. Heard you drew the mountain patrol. What can I get you?" Hayes set her rifle case on the counter between them. M24 system, match-grade ammunition, extreme cold weather optics package. She paused, calculating requirements. For an extended operation. 72 rounds, diversified grain weights, half standard ball, half armor-piercing incendiary. Kowalski's eyebrows rose slightly. Standard patrol loads rarely exceeded 30 rounds, and the PI ammunition was typically reserved for special circumstances. "You planning to start a war up there, Sergeant?" "Planning to finish one." The specialist didn't press for details. Armory personnel learned early that curiosity could be dangerous in a combat zone. He pulled Hayes' weapon from its case and began field stripping it with practiced efficiency. The M24 sniper weapon system was a precision instrument built around a Remington 700 action, capable of sub-minute of angle accuracy at distances exceeding 800 meters. In Hayes' hands, it had never failed to perform. "Scope preference?" Kowalski asked, examining the rifle's mounting system. "Leopold Mark IV, variable magnification. I need flexibility for unknown engagement distances." Hayes watched him work, noting the care with which he handled each component. Good armorers understood that their job extended far beyond simple maintenance. They were partners in the complex machinery of warfare. "How's the barrel treating you? Last time you were in here, you mentioned some copper fouling. Cleaned up fine. Accuracy hasn't degraded." Hayes ran her finger along the rifle's stock, feeling for imperfections that might affect performance. The weapon was an extension of her body, its weight and balance as familiar as her own heartbeat. She had fired thousands of rounds through. This particular system, learning its idiosyncrasies, its preferences for different ammunition loads, the way it responded to temperature changes and altitude variations. Kowalski mounted the optic with precise torque specifications, then handed the assembled weapon back for inspection. Hayes shouldered it, checked the eye relief, tested the scope's adjustment mechanisms. Everything felt correct. Ammunition preferences for the loadout? Federal gold medal match for precision work. M118LR for barrier penetration. Mix them randomly so I don't develop unconscious patterns. It was a detail that most snipers overlooked, but Hayes had learned that even minor predictabilities could be exploited by an observant enemy. The specialist pulled boxes from a temperature-controlled storage locker and began hand-selecting cartridges based on weight consistency and dimensional uniformity. Each round would be visually inspected for defects, weighed to ensure consistency, and marked with a discrete code indicating its specifications. Intel package came through about an hour ago, Kowalski mentioned casually as he worked. Phantom's last confirmed kill was at 1,247 meters. Single shot, center mass, through a gap in cover no wider than 8 inches. Target was moving. Hayes absorbed this information without comment, but it confirmed her assessment of the threat level. A marksman capable of precision shots at extended range through minimal exposure windows was operating at the apex of the profession. This would not be a battle won through superior equipment or overwhelming firepower. Environmental considerations? Temperature variations from 15 degrees at night to 95 during peak heating. Altitude ranges from 4,200 to 8,400 feet along your patrol route. Winds are unpredictable, generally cross-valley during daylight hours. Kowalski sealed the selected ammunition in a waterproof container. Humidity stays low, but morning fog can reduce visibility to less than 50 meters in the draws. Hayes mentally cataloged the variables that would affect ballistic performance. Temperature swings would change powder burn rates and muzzle velocities. Altitude changes would affect air density and trajectory calculations. Wind patterns would require constant adjustment and careful reading of environmental indicators. Communications. Package: standard PRC-148 with crypto-fill current through Friday. Emergency beacon on GPS frequency. Backup handheld on the company net. Kowalski handed her the radio equipment, each piece tested and verified. Battalion wants position reports every 6 hours unless contact is imminent. The communication requirements represented a fundamental tension in sniper operations. Maintaining contact with higher headquarters was essential for coordination and safety, but radio transmissions created electronic signatures that sophisticated opponents could track and exploit. Hayes would need to balance operational security with command requirements, medical supplies, individual first aid kit, plus extended trauma package for penetrating wounds, morphine auto-injectors, combat gauze, chest seals. Everything rated for solo operations. The medical kit was deliberately comprehensive. Designed to sustain an isolated operator through injuries that might otherwise require immediate evacuation, Hayes inspected each component of her loadout with systematic thoroughness. Night vision devices, range-finding equipment, camouflage materials, rations for 4 days, water purification tablets, emergency shelter systems. The total weight approached 60 pounds, distributed across her body armor and assault pack in a configuration that balanced accessibility with weight distribution. Weather forecast? Clear skies for the next 48 hours, then possible thunderstorms moving in from the west. Nothing severe, but visibility could degrade rapidly if the cloud's ceiling drops. Kowalski consulted a printout from the meteorological section. Moon phase is waning gibbous, so you'll have decent ambient light for night movement. The weather window was acceptable but not ideal. Clear skies would provide excellent visibility for long-range engagements, but would also eliminate atmospheric disturbances that might conceal her position. The approaching storm system could complicate extraction procedures if the mission extended beyond the 48-hour mark. Vehicle availability for insertion. Blackhawk crew is standing by. Pilots are Warrant Officers Martinez and Webb. Good reputations, experienced with special operations insertions. Kowalski made notes on his equipment log as Hayes signed for each item. They'll put you down at grid coordinates 42 SUB8, 847,394. Approximately 3 kilometers from your intended patrol area. The insertion point was farther from the objective area than Hayes would have preferred, but helicopter operations in mountainous terrain required compromises between tactical convenience and flight safety. She would need to cover the intervening distance on foot, moving carefully through terrain that might already be under observation. Extraction procedures? Primary pickup at the same coordinates, 72 hours after insertion. If you miss the window, secondary extraction is available at 48-hour intervals thereafter, but you'll need to request it through higher headquarters. The implications were clear. Extended operations would require justification through command channels, increasing political complexity and reducing tactical flexibility. Hayes shouldered her equipment load and tested the weight distribution. Everything felt balanced and accessible. Her rifle hung across her chest in a tactical sling that allowed rapid transition to firing position. Secondary weapons included a suppressed pistol and a fighting knife, both positioned for ambidextrous access. "One more thing," Kowalski said, reaching beneath his workbench. He produced a small device that Hayes didn't immediately recognize. Experimental equipment. Handheld acoustic signature analyzer. It can distinguish between different rifle systems based on muzzle blast characteristics. Hayes examined the device, noting its compact construction and simple interface. How accurate? Field tests show 93% reliability for identifying specific weapon systems at ranges up to 600 meters. It might help you track Phantom's movements even when you can't see him. Kowalski demonstrated the controls. Simple operation. Point it toward the sound source. Press the Analyze button, and it provides identification data within 15 seconds. The technology represented a significant tactical advantage. Most snipers were creatures of habit who preferred familiar equipment, and weapon-specific acoustic signatures could provide early warning of enemy positions, even when visual contact was impossible. Battery life? 48 hours of continuous operation, longer if you use it selectively. Solar charging panel extends. That indefinitely under good conditions. Kowalski handed her the device along with a brief technical manual. Experimental means no official support if it breaks, but Intel thinks it might give you an edge. Hayes secured the acoustic analyzer in her equipment load. Grateful for any advantage in what promised to be an asymmetric engagement, her opponent held every benefit of terrain, preparation, and initiative. Superior equipment and tactical innovation might provide the margin necessary for success, Final equipment check? They ran through the complete inventory one last time, verifying serial numbers, testing electronic systems, confirming ammunition counts. Hayes signed the final paperwork and gathered her gear. The total preparation process had consumed nearly 2 hours, but thorough equipment verification could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. "Good hunting, Sergeant." Hayes nodded and headed for the door. The night air outside the armory was cooler than expected, carrying the scent of diesel fuel and dust that characterized all American military installations in Afghanistan. She had 3 hours remaining before insertion, time that she would spend in final mental preparation and equipment rehearsal. The base continued its nocturnal routine around her. Guard towers maintained their vigilant watch over the perimeter. Mechanics serviced vehicles in pools of harsh light. Radio operators monitored communication networks that connected this isolated outpost to a global military infrastructure. All of it would continue unchanged regardless of what happened in the mountains over the next 72 hours. Hayes walked slowly toward her quarters, feeling the weight of equipment and responsibility settling into familiar patterns across her shoulders. She had been assigned what others considered a support mission, a reconnaissance task that would keep her safely away from the primary engagement. But she understood the tactical realities better than the officers who had planned the operation. Lieutenant Shun and Staff Sergeant Torres would establish their observation post according to doctrine, following procedures that had been developed through decades of conventional warfare. They would position themselves where enemy activity was expected, scanning fields of fire that intelligence assessments suggested Phantom would use. They would wait for their target to appear in predetermined kill zones, following engagement. Protocols that assumed predictable enemy behavior. Hayes knew that Phantom had already demonstrated his understanding of American tactical methods. His previous kills had exploited predictable patrol routes, standard operating procedures, and conventional thinking. He was not fighting the war that American doctrine had prepared for. He was fighting his own war according to his own rules, on terrain that he understood better than any foreign military force ever could. The real mission would not unfold according to the official plan. Hayes would not remain in a support role, observing from safe distances and reporting contact to others. She would hunt Phantom directly, using methods that conventional wisdom would consider reckless, in terrain that tactical manuals would classify as unsuitable for single-operator missions. She would disappear into the mountains for 3 days, carrying everything necessary for survival and combat in a hostile environment. She would move through valleys that had witnessed warfare for thousands of years, where Alexander's soldiers had fought and died, where British regiments had learned bitter lessons about asymmetric conflict, where Soviet forces had discovered the limitations of conventional military power. The assignment was impossible by traditional standards. A single American soldier tracking a professional killer through terrain that favored the defender, with minimal support and no backup, operating against an enemy who had already proven his superiority over standard military tactics. The odds of success were vanishingly small, but impossibility had never deterred Hayes before. She had built her career on accomplishing tasks that others considered beyond reasonable expectation. She had learned to find success in the spaces between official doctrine and tactical reality, where individual skill and determination could overcome institutional limitations. Tomorrow, she would enter the mountains alone. The helicopter's rotors beat against the pre-dawn darkness as Hayes climbed aboard at 0255 hours. Chief Warrant Officer Martinez sat in the pilot's seat, running through his pre-flight checklist with methodical precision. His co-pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Webb, monitored weather reports and flight path updates on a tablet mounted between them. Neither man looked back as Hayes secured herself in the cargo bay, but she caught Martinez's reflection in the cockpit, glass a brief nod that acknowledged her presence without compromising his concentration. The cabin smelled of hydraulic fluid, and worn nylon webbing. Hayes positioned herself behind the crew chiefs, facing the rear of the aircraft where the cargo doors would open for her insertion. Her equipment was secured in a configuration that allowed rapid egress while maintaining balance during the fast rope descent that would put her on the ground. The acoustic analyzer rode in a chest pouch where she could access it quickly without interfering with her primary weapon systems. Winds are variable but manageable, Webb's voice crackled through the internal communication system. Visibility unlimited above 8,000 feet, patchy fog in the valleys below 6,000. Should clear by sunrise. Hayes checked her watch. Sunrise would occur at 0627 hours, giving her approximately 3.5 hours of darkness for initial movement and positioning. The timing was crucial. She needed to reach her intended overwatch position before full daylight exposed her to observation, but she also needed enough ambient light to move safely through unfamiliar terrain. The Black Hawk lifted off with the smooth power of a well-maintained aircraft. Below them, the lights of forward operating base Blackwater dwindled to pinpricks against the surrounding darkness. Hayes felt the familiar sensation of transition from the known to the unknown, from the relative safety of American-controlled territory to the uncertainties of contested ground. The flight path took them northeast through valleys that had witnessed decades of conflict. Martinez flew without running lights, using night vision systems and terrain-following radar to navigate through mountain passes that rose to nearly 10,000 feet. The aircraft's engines echoed off canyon walls, creating acoustic signatures that would announce their presence to anyone listening, but the element of surprise had already been compromised by necessity. Helicopter insertions were never subtle. 10 minutes to insertion, Martinez announced. Hayes conducted a final equipment check, verifying that each piece of gear was secured and accessible. Her rifle hung across her chest in a patrol carry position. The suppressed pistol rode in a thigh holster. Spare magazines were distributed across her load-bearing equipment in locations she could reach without shifting her primary weapon. Water bottles balanced ammunition weight. The medical kit occupied a position where she could access it, even if wounded. The mountains below appeared as dark silhouettes against a star-filled sky. No artificial lights marked human habitation. The terrain was primal, unchanged by centuries of warfare, except for the occasional impact crater where modern weapons had scarred ancient stone. Hayes studied the landscape through night vision goggles, noting terrain features that she had memorized from topographical maps but was seeing for the first time in reality. 5 minutes. The helicopter began its descent, following a ridgeline that would mask its approach from the valley where Phantom was believed to operate. Martinez demonstrated the skill that had earned him an assignment to Special Operations Support, flying just above the terrain at speeds that would challenge even experienced pilots. The aircraft's airframe vibrated with controlled stress as it maneuvered through air currents that rose from the valley floor. Hayes moved to the insertion position, clipping her fast rope gloves and checking the anchor points for the 60-foot rope that would carry her to the ground. The crew chief verified her harness connections and gave her a thumbs-up signal. Everything was ready. 2 minutes. Winds are 5 knots from the southwest. The cargo doors slid open, revealing the mountain landscape rushing past below. Cold air flooded the cabin, carrying the scent of pine and stone. Hayes could see her insertion point ahead, a relatively flat area, surrounded by boulder fields that would provide immediate cover after landing. The helicopter would not touch down. She would descend on the rope and release at ground level, allowing Martinez to depart immediately and minimize exposure time. 30 seconds. The aircraft flared, converting forward speed into lift as Martinez brought it into a stable hover. The fast rope deployment system activated automatically, sending the thick nylon line tumbling toward the ground. Hayes watched it hit and stabilize, then received the final go signal from the crew chief. She grasped the rope with both hands and stepped into space, The descent took 12 seconds. Hayes controlled her speed with practiced technique, landing softly in a crouch that absorbed the impact energy. She immediately moved away from the rope and took cover behind a truck-sized boulder, listening as the helicopter departed toward the south. The sound of rotors faded gradually, leaving behind the mountain silence that would be her constant companion for the next 72 hours. Hayes remained motionless for 10 minutes, allowing her hearing to adjust to the ambient sound levels, and scanning for any indication of enemy activity. The valley was quiet except for wind moving through stone formations and the distant call of night birds. No voices, no mechanical sounds, no radio transmissions detected on her monitoring equipment. She activated her GPS receiver and confirmed her position. The insertion had been accurate within 50 meters of the planned coordinates. 3 kilometers of mountain terrain separated her from the area where Phantom was believed to operate. The route would take her through draws and across ridge lines. That offered concealment, but also channeled movement into predictable patterns. Hayes began moving at 0347 hours, 43 minutes before official sunrise. She navigated by terrain association, using prominent features to maintain her bearing while avoiding skylines where her silhouette might be visible to distant observers. The pace was deliberately slow, each step carefully placed to minimize noise and avoid loose stones that might betray her passage. The first kilometer took 57 minutes to traverse. Hayes crossed 2 ridge lines and descended into a narrow valley where seasonal runoff had carved deep channels through the soil. She followed the larger channel for 600 meters, using its depth for concealment while making steady progress toward her objective area. The acoustic analyzer remained silent, detecting no weapon signatures in the surrounding terrain. At 0512 hours, Hayes reached an observation point that provided good visibility of the valley where Lieutenant Chun and Staff Sergeant Torres would establish their primary position. Through her rifle scope, she could see the ridgeline they would occupy, approximately 2 kilometers to the southeast. The position offered excellent fields of fire, but was also visible from multiple directions, making it vulnerable to counter-dash surveillance. Hayes continued moving, following a game trail that wound through a boulder field toward higher elevation. The trail showed recent used boot prints in sandy soil, disturbed vegetation, a cigarette butt that appeared relatively fresh. She photographed the evidence with a digital camera, noting GPS coordinates for later analysis. Someone had passed this way within the past week. The second kilometer required an hour and 15 minutes, complicated by loose scree that threatened to cascade with each step. Hayes moved with extreme care, testing each foothold before committing her full weight. The altitude was beginning to affect her breathing, and she paused frequently to maintain visual and auditory surveillance of the surrounding terrain. At 0643 hours, 11 minutes after sunrise, Hayes reached a position that provided an overwatch of the primary valley. She was approximately 1,500 meters from the area where Phantom's previous kills had occurred, positioned on high ground that offered multiple escape routes while maintaining visual contact with potential engagement areas. She established a hide position among a cluster of boulders that provided 360-degree concealment while allowing observation through carefully selected gaps. The position was large enough to accommodate her equipment and body without requiring movement that might create detectable signatures. Water was available from a seasonal seep 20 meters away. Overhead cover would protect against aerial observation. Hayes spent 47 minutes improving the position, arranging stones to create firing ports and eliminating vegetation that might interfere with observation. She tested sight lines to potential target areas, measured distances with her laser rangefinder, and noted wind indicators that would affect ballistic calculations. The position was tactically sound. At 0756 hours, she detected movement in the valley below. Two figures moved along a ridgeline approximately 2 kilometers away, Chun and Torres, establishing their primary observation post. Hayes watched them through her rifle scope, noting their movement patterns and the position they selected. They were following standard procedures, but their location was precisely where enemy intelligence would expect to find American counter-sniper teams. Hayes activated her radio and transmitted a brief position report to company headquarters. Base, this is Reaper 6. In position grid 42 SUB 871,427. Primary element in sight. Commencing surveillance operations. The response came immediately. Reaper 6, base copies your position. Primary element reports establishment complete. Continue the mission. Hayes turned off the radio and settled into surveillance mode. The real work was about to begin. For the next 6 hours, she maintained continuous observation of the valley, using her rifle scope and binoculars to scan areas where enemy activity might occur. She photographed potential shooting positions, noted patterns of light and shadow that changed throughout the day, and mapped routes that an experienced sniper might use for movement and escape. At 11:34 hours, the acoustic analyzer detected a weapon signature. The device indicated a rifle, discharge approximately 800 meters to the northeast, consistent with a precision weapon system firing match-grade ammunition. Hayes immediately focused her observation in that direction, but saw no muzzle flash, no movement, no visible signs of the shooter's position. The shot had come from concealment so complete that even knowing the general direction provided no tactical advantage. Hayes waited. Professional snipers rarely fired single shots without purpose. Either Phantom had engaged a target, or he was conducting a ranging shot to verify ballistic data for a future engagement. In either case, his position was now compromised to anyone. With the equipment to detect weapon signatures, 17 minutes later, Hayes heard the distant sound of helicopter rotors. A medical evacuation aircraft appeared from the south, flying directly toward the area where Chun and Torres had established their observation post. The aircraft's flight path and urgency suggested a casualty evacuation in progress. Hayes understood immediately what had happened. Phantom had successfully engaged the primary counter-sniper team, probably killing or wounding one of them with a precision shot from a concealed position. The conventional approach had failed exactly as Hayes had predicted it would. She was now alone in the mountains, hunting a professional killer who had just demonstrated his tactical superiority over American military doctrine. The mission parameters had changed fundamentally. This was no longer a support operation. It was a duel between two of the world's most skilled marksmen, and Phantom held every advantage except one. Hayes knew these mountains. She had spent 3 deployments learning their secrets, understanding their moods, adapting to their challenges. Phantom might be the superior marksman, but Hayes was fighting on ground she had claimed through blood and patience. The real hunt was about to begin. The medical evacuation helicopter disappeared beyond the southern ridge at 12:03 hours, its rotors beating a rhythm that faded into mountain silence. Hayes remained motionless in her hide, rifle scope trained on the area where Chun and Torres had established their position. Through the magnified optics, she could see disturbed earth where the helicopter had landed, but no movement indicated surviving personnel. The primary counter-sniper team had been eliminated with clinical precision. Hayes adjusted her scopes, focus, and began systematically scanning potential firing positions within 800 meters of the casualty site. Phantom had demonstrated his ability to engage targets at extended range while remaining completely concealed. The shot that had compromised the primary team required line of sight to their position, stable firing platform, and escape route that allowed withdrawal without detection. Only a handful of locations met all 3 criteria. The acoustic analyzer had detected the weapon signature from the northeast, but sound could be deceptive in mountain terrain. Echoes bounced off canyon walls, creating false bearings that led inexperienced operators into fatal mistakes. Hayes trusted her equipment, but verified its readings against visual observation and terrain analysis. The device indicated direction, but not distance. The actual firing position could be anywhere within a 2-kilometer arc dot at 12:47 hours. Hayes detected movement. A shadow shifted among the rocks approximately 900 meters away, visible only because she had been watching that specific location. For the past 23 minutes, the movement was subtle, a slight change in the pattern of light and darkness that might have been wind-blown vegetation or thermal expansion of stone. But vegetation didn't move with such deliberate purpose, and thermal effects didn't create angular displacements consistent with human motion. Hayes studied the area through her rifle scope, increasing magnification to its maximum setting. The terrain was a maze of fractured stone and scrub vegetation, offering countless opportunities for concealment. She could see no clear target, no definitive human silhouette, but something was moving with intelligence and purpose among the rocks. She activated the laser rangefinder. Distance to target, 887 meters. Elevation difference, 243 feet lower than her position. Wind speed, 4.7 miles per hour, variable direction. Temperature, 73 degrees Fahrenheit. Barometric pressure, 24.67 inches of mercury. All factors would affect bullet trajectory and required precise calculation for accurate engagement. Hayes opened her range card and began computing ballistic solutions. At 887 meters, her 168-grain match ammunition would drop approximately 91 inches below line of sight. The elevation difference would reduce that drop to 87 inches. Cross winds would deflect the bullet 3.2 inches for each mile per hour of wind. Speed, but the variable direction complicated calculation. She would need to read wind conditions at the moment of firing and adjust accordingly. The movement stopped. Whatever had been shifting among the rocks had either taken cover or relocated entirely. Hayes continued her observation, knowing that patience was often more valuable than marksmanship in sniper warfare. Professional shooters revealed themselves through impatience, through small movements that seemed insignificant, but provided targeting opportunities for prepared opponents. At 13:12 hours, Hayes' radio crackled with an incoming transmission. Reaper 6 base, Citrapon primary element contact. Hayes keyed her microphone. Base Reaper 6. Primary element appears to have sustained casualties. Medical evacuation complete. No contact with survivors. Copy, Reaper 6. Orders are to continue surveillance and report enemy contact. Do not engage without authorization. The transmission ended, but Hayes understood the implications. Higher headquarters was treating this as an intelligence gathering. Operation rather than active combat. They wanted information about enemy capabilities and positions, not decisive engagement. But Hayes knew that Phantom would not remain in the area indefinitely. He had accomplished his mission by eliminating the primary counter-sniper team. His next logical move would be withdrawal to avoid follow-up operations. Hayes faced a tactical decision that would define the remainder of the mission. She could follow orders, maintain surveillance, and hope that Phantom revealed himself sufficiently for targeting data that could be passed to follow-up forces. Or she could engage immediately, using the limited intelligence she had developed, to attempt elimination of a target that represented a continuing threat to American personnel. The decision was complicated by uncertainty about Phantom's precise location. Hayes had detected movement and suspected a general area, but she lacked positive target identification. Engaging without clear sight of the target violated fundamental principles of sniper warfare and risked revealing her own position without achieving mission success. At 13:34 hours, the acoustic analyzer detected another weapon signature. This time, the device indicated a position approximately 1,200 meters to the east, significantly displaced from the previous contact. Either Phantom had moved with remarkable speed and stealth, or Hayes was dealing with multiple enemy snipers operating in coordinated fashion. The second possibility was particularly troubling, as it suggested a level of organization and capability that exceeded initial intelligence assessments. Hayes immediately shifted her observation to the new bearing, scanning terrain features that could support long-range precision shooting. The eastern approach offered several elevated positions with good fields of fire, but it also required crossing open ground that should have been visible to her surveillance. She had not observed any movement in that direction. Through her rifle scope, Hayes studied rock formations and vegetation patterns that might conceal a sniper position. The magnification revealed details invisible to naked eye observation, shadows that might hide human shapes, angles that suggested artificial construction, textures that differed from natural stone formation. But nothing provided definitive evidence of enemy presence. The silence stretched for 17 minutes. No additional weapon signatures, no movement, no radio transmissions on frequencies that might indicate enemy communication. Hayes began to suspect that she was being deliberately manipulated, drawn into revealing her own position through reaction to false indicators. Professional snipers understood psychological warfare as well as ballistic science, creating false signatures suggesting movement where none existed, and forcing opponents into premature action were tactics that had been refined through decades of asymmetric conflict. Phantom might be testing her discipline, evaluating her responses, learning her patterns for future exploitation. At 13:56 hours, Hayes made her decision. She would relocate to a position that offered better observation of both suspected enemy locations while providing improved concealment and multiple escape routes. The movement would be risky, requiring exposure during transit and abandonment of a carefully prepared fighting position. But remaining static while the enemy maneuvered freely would ultimately prove fatal. Hayes began the complex process of extracting from her hide without creating detectable signatures. Each piece of equipment was secured in sequence, ensuring that nothing would shift or make noise during movement. Her rifle was configured for patrol carry, balanced for rapid transition to firing position if contact occurred during relocation. The new position was approximately 400 meters southeast of her current location, positioned on a ridge that provided overwatch of the valley floor while offering concealment from observation at higher elevations. The route would take her through a drainage that offered cover from direct observation, but also channeled movement into a predictable pattern. Hayes began moving at 14:03 hours, using terrain features and vegetation for concealment, while maintaining constant vigilance for enemy activity. Each step was deliberately placed to minimize noise and avoid disturbing loose stones that might cascade down the slope. Progress was necessarily slow, but speed was less important than stealth. Halfway to her destination, Hayes froze. The acoustic analyzer was detecting a new signature, but this one was different from the previous contacts. Instead of the sharp crack of a precision rifle, the device indicated the sustained buzz of electronic equipment radio transmissions, possibly encrypted communication between multiple operators. The signal was weak but persistent, originating from a location approximately 600 meters to the northwest. Hayes realized that she had been correct about facing multiple opponents. Phantom was not operating alone. He commanded a small team of professionally trained personnel, probably including a spotter and possibly additional shooters, positioned to cover his primary firing positions. The acoustic signatures she had detected were coordinated elements of a larger operation designed to eliminate American counter-sniper capabilities. The tactical situation had fundamentally changed. Hayes was not engaged in a duel between individual marksmen. She was conducting a solo operation against an organized enemy team that held every advantage of numbers, position, and preparation. The mission parameters that had seemed challenging now appeared almost suicidal, but Hayes had committed to the movement, and turning back would expose her to observation during the most vulnerable phase of relocation. She continued toward her new position, moving with even greater care while processing the implications of her discovery. At 14:47 hours, she reached the new hide site and began immediate preparation for engagement. The position offered excellent concealment and multiple firing lanes, but it was also closer to suspected enemy positions. Hayes would be operating at ranges where her marksmanship skills could be decisive, but where any mistake would likely prove fatal. She established her rifle in a stable firing position and began range calculations for probable target areas. Laser rangefinder provided precise distance measurements to key terrain features. Wind indicators showed consistent patterns that could be predicted for ballistic purposes. Lighting conditions were optimal for precision shooting. At 15:23 hours, Hayes achieved positive target identification. Through her rifle scope, magnified to maximum power, she observed a human figure moving among rocks at a distance of 743 meters. The target was partially concealed but clearly visible, carrying equipment consistent with sniper operations. The individual appeared to be conducting surveillance of the valley where the primary American team had been eliminated. Hayes centered her crosshairs on the target's center mass and began final preparations for engagement. Wind speed, 3.1 miles per hour from the southwest. Temperature, 79 degrees Fahrenheit. Range, 743 meters. Bullet drop, 67 inches. Wind deflection, 2.2 inches left. She controlled her breathing, allowing her heart rate to slow to optimal levels. For precision shooting, her finger found the trigger's first stage, taking up slack without disturbing the rifle's alignment. The crosshairs settled on the target with mechanical precision, but as Hayes prepared to fire, the target disappeared. The figure had either taken cover or relocated with speed that suggested awareness of being observed. Hayes maintained her sight. Picture, scanning adjacent areas where the target might reappear, but the opportunity had passed. Professional snipers rarely provided second chances. Hayes realized that she had been detected. Somehow, despite her careful concealment and discipline, movement, Phantom or his associates had identified her position. The engagement was no longer a hunt conducted from concealment. It had become a direct confrontation between opponents, who were now aware of each other's presence. The real duel was about to begin. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the mountain terrain as Hayes settled into what would become a battle of patience and precision. At 15:47 hours, she understood that conventional sniper tactics had failed. Phantom and his team knew her approximate location, but she had also identified their operational area. The engagement had evolved into a deadly game of chess played across 800 meters of hostile terrain. Hayes began implementing techniques she had developed through years of unconventional warfare. Instead of maintaining a fixed position like traditional doctrine suggested, she would create multiple firing points connected by concealed movement routes. Phantom expected her to behave like the counter-sniper teams he had already eliminated. She would give him something different. Working with deliberate care, Hayes identified 7 positions within a 200-meter radius that offered concealment, stable shooting platforms, and escape routes. Each position provided different angles of observation, forcing any enemy surveillance to cover multiple areas simultaneously. The technique violated standard sniper employment doctrine, but doctrine had already proven inadequate against this particular opponent. At 16:12 hours, Hayes began constructing her first alternate position. The location was a natural depression, surrounded by weathered boulders, approximately 180 meters northeast of her primary hide. She moved equipment in stages, carrying essential items during carefully timed movements when visual observation from enemy positions would be most difficult. The process required 2 hours and 47 minutes to complete. Hayes transported her rifle, ammunition, water, and communication equipment to the new position while leaving decoy materials in her original location. From a distance, casual observation would suggest continued occupation of the primary hide while she operated from an entirely different area. At 1859 hours, just as the sun began its descent toward the western ridges, Hayes detected movement from her new position. 2 figures were visible approximately 950 meters away, moving along a ridge that would bring them closer to her suspected location. The individuals carried equipment profiles consistent with military operations, rifles, packs, communication gear. They moved with the tactical spacing and careful observation characteristic of professional soldiers. Hayes studied them through her rifle scope, noting details that would help identify their capabilities and intentions. Both carried precision rifle systems. Both wore clothing that blended with the local terrain. Both demonstrated movement discipline that suggested extensive training and experience. These were not insurgent fighters using improvised tactics. They were professional military personnel, possibly foreign special operations, forces operating in support of local resistance elements. The lead figure paused at a position that offered good observation of Hayes' original hide location. Through her scope, Hayes could see him using optical equipment to scan the area where she had spent the morning. His search pattern was systematic, professional, thorough. He was looking for exactly the kind of position that American sniper doctrine would dictate. Hayes made a tactical decision that would define the remainder of the engagement. Instead of waiting for a perfect shot opportunity, she would create one by forcing the enemy team to react to unexpected circumstances. The technique was risky, but conventional approaches had already proven ineffective. At 1923 hours, Hayes fired a single shot. The bullet was not aimed at either visible target. Instead, she placed it precisely 50 meters to the left of the lead figure's position, striking a large rock in a location that would create an unmistakable impact signature, while providing no information about the shooter's actual location. The 168-grain projectile fragmented against stone, creating a cloud of dust and debris that would be visible to the enemy team. The reaction was immediate and revealing. Both figures took cover behind available terrain features, but their movement patterns indicated training in counter-sniper operations. They did not flee or withdraw. Instead, they began systematic procedures for locating and engaging the source of incoming fire. Hayes observed their response through her rifle scope, learning valuable information about their capabilities and tactics. The lead figure activated what appeared to be electronic equipment, possibly a radio or acoustic detection system. The second individual began moving to a position that would provide an overwatch of areas from which the shot could have originated. But Hayes was no longer in any of those areas. She had fired from a position that was inconsistent with her suspected location, using ballistic angles that would confuse standard back-azimuth calculations. The enemy team would waste time and resources searching areas where she had never been. At 1956 hours, Hayes began moving to her third prepared position. The relocation required crossing 140 meters of terrain that offered minimal concealment from overhead observation. Hayes waited for optimal lighting conditions, the period just after sunset when shadows provided maximum concealment while residual light still allowed navigation. She moved in stages, using terrain features to break up her silhouette, while maintaining constant awareness of potential observation points. The new position was located on a reverse slope that provided concealment from the enemy team's known locations while offering observation of routes they might use for flanking movements. Hayes had deliberately positioned herself outside the area where conventional tactics would suggest placement of a counter-sniper element. From the new location, Hayes could observe both enemy figures as they continued their search. They were operating with professional competence, but they were searching for an opponent who was following predictable patterns. Hayes was operating according to principles she had developed through years of successful missions principles. That emphasized adaptability over doctrine. At 20:34 hours, the enemy team made a critical mistake. The lead figure exposed himself to observation while attempting to identify Hayes' firing position. For approximately 12 seconds, he was visible in profile against a lighter background, presenting a clear target at a range of 876 meters. Hayes had a clear sight picture, stable firing position, and optimal environmental conditions for precision. Shooting. Hayes centered her crosshairs on the target's upper torso and began final firing preparations. Wind speed, 2.8 miles per hour from the west. Temperature, 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Range, 876 meters. Bullet drop, 89 inches. Wind deflection, 1.7 inches right. Her breathing slowed to optimal rhythm. Heart rate decreased to precision shooting levels. Finger pressure increased gradually on the trigger mechanism. The crosshairs settled with mechanical precision on the target's center mass. Hayes fired. The 168-grain match. Bullet crossed 876 meters of mountain air in 1.2 seconds, following a trajectory calculated to compensate for gravitational drop, wind deflection, and atmospheric density. The projectile struck the target in the upper chest, creating a wound cavity that would prove immediately fatal. Through her rifle scope, Hayes observed the target's collapse and the immediate reaction of his partner. The second figure took cover and began calling on what was clearly a radio communication system. Within minutes, additional personnel would converge on the area. Hayes needed to relocate immediately, but as she prepared to move, Hayes heard something that changed her understanding of the tactical situation. Multiple voices were calling from positions throughout the valley, not radio transmissions, but direct voice communication between personnel positioned closer than. She had realized Phantom was not operating with a small team. He commanded a network of observers and fighters distributed across the mountainous terrain. Hayes was outnumbered by at least 5-1, possibly more. She was operating alone against an organized force that included professionally trained snipers, spotters, and support personnel. The mission had evolved beyond anything that American military planners had anticipated. At 2,118 hours, Hayes began implementing survival procedures. She abandoned her established positions and began moving toward terrain that would offer better concealment and escape routes. The engagement was no longer about eliminating a single high-value target. It had become about staying alive long enough to report intelligence about enemy capabilities that exceeded all previous assessments. Hayes moved through the darkness using night vision equipment and terrain navigation skills developed through years of mountain warfare. Behind her, she could hear coordinated search activities as enemy personnel converged on her last known position. Radio chatter increased on frequencies that her monitoring equipment could detect but not decode. The realization that she was facing a sophisticated enemy organization rather than a single sniper fundamentally changed her tactical approach. Individual marksmanship skills, while important, were insufficient against coordinated group tactics. Hayes needed to think like a guerrilla fighter rather than a conventional soldier. At 2,203 hours, Hayes reached a position that offered temporary security and long-range observation capabilities. The location was a cave system carved into the mountainside by centuries of erosion. The entrance was concealed by vegetation and positioned to provide observation of multiple approach routes while offering protection from direct and indirect fire. Water was available from an underground spring. The position could be defended by a single person against significant numerical superiority. Hayes established defensive preparations and began planning her next moves. She had successfully eliminated one enemy operator and gathered intelligence about enemy capabilities that would be valuable to future American operations. But she was still trapped in hostile territory with limited supplies and communication equipment that might be compromised by enemy electronic warfare capabilities. The mission had 34 hours remaining before scheduled extraction. Hayes needed to survive that long while continuing to gather intelligence about enemy operations. She also needed to find opportunities to reduce enemy capabilities without exposing herself to overwhelming numerical superiority. As midnight approached, Hayes settled into the cave position and began the patient work of long-term survival in hostile territory. The mission had evolved beyond anything anticipated in the original planning, but she remained committed to successful completion. Outside, enemy search teams continued their activities throughout the night. Hayes could hear vehicles moving along valley roads and aircraft conducting surveillance flights. The enemy response confirmed that she had engaged a high-value target whose elimination had triggered significant operational reactions, but Hayes remained undetected in her mountain refuge, planning her next moves in a game that had become far more complex and dangerous than anyone had imagined. The quiet success of eliminating one enemy operator had revealed the existence of a threat that would require fundamental changes in American tactical approaches. The mission was far from over. Dawn arrived at 0627 hours on the second day, with crystalline clarity that revealed the full scope of Hayes' tactical situation. From her cave position, she could observe enemy personnel moving through the valley in coordinated search patterns. Through her rifle scope, she counted at least 12 individuals distributed across 4 distinct groups, each equipped with professional-grade equipment and demonstrating advanced small unit tactics. The enemy force included elements she had not previously identified. 2 teams carried heavy equipment that appeared to be electronic warfare systems, sophisticated radio direction finding gear capable of tracking her communications equipment. Another group transported what looked like mortar components, suggesting indirect fire capabilities that could neutralize her cave position if discovered. The 4th element consisted of snipers equipped with long-range precision rifles and advanced optical systems. Hayes realized that she had stumbled into an operation far larger than the intelligence assessment that had initiated her mission. This was not a single rogue sniper causing casualties through opportunistic attacks. This was a coordinated military operation designed to eliminate American counter-sniper capabilities, while gathering intelligence about tactical procedures and equipment specifications. At 0743 hours, Hayes' radio crackled with an incoming transmission from Forward Operating Base Blackwater. Reaper 6 Base. Scheduled communication check. Provide sitrep and current position. Hayes faced a critical decision about how to respond. Standard procedure required her to report her current situation and request immediate extraction given the overwhelming enemy numerical superiority. But she also understood that her radio transmissions were being monitored by enemy electronic warfare specialists who would use any broadcast to triangulate her position. Hayes keyed her microphone for a brief transmission. Base, Reaper 6. In position, surveillance continuing. Will report developments. The response came immediately. Reaper 6, primary element casualties confirmed. Orders are to maintain surveillance and avoid contact. Extraction remains scheduled for 0300 tomorrow. Hayes turned off her radio, knowing that even that brief exchange had provided enemy direction-finding equipment with enough signal data to establish a general bearing toward her position. She needed to relocate immediately, but movement during daylight hours would expose her to observation by multiple enemy elements positioned throughout the valley. Instead, Hayes began implementing a deception plan that would buy her time while misleading enemy search efforts. Using materials available in the cave system, Hayes constructed a radio beacon that would transmit false signals from a location, APPROX, IMATEL, Y 500 meters from her actual position. The device was simple but effective, a timer-activated transmitter that would broadcast brief radio bursts on frequencies consistent with American military communications equipment. At 0834 hours, Hayes activated the beacon and observed enemy reaction through her rifle scope. Within 17 minutes, two search teams began converging on the false signal location. Their movement patterns confirmed that enemy electronic warfare capabilities were sophisticated enough to provide accurate directional information, but not precise enough to distinguish between her actual position and the decoy transmitter. While enemy attention focused on the false signal, Hayes began preparing for movement to her final planned position. The location was a ridge approximately 800 meters northeast of the cave, positioned to provide overwatch of the primary extraction point, while offering concealment from the search teams that were systematically sweeping the valley floor. The movement would require crossing terrain that offered minimal concealment during daylight hours. Hayes waited until 11:47 hours, when the sun's angle created optimal shadow patterns that would help break up her silhouette against the mountainous background. She also timed the movement to coincide with increased enemy radio activity that would mask any acoustic signatures her passage might create. Hayes began moving at 12:03 hours, carrying essential equipment while leaving non-critical items in the cave to suggest continued occupation. The route took her through a series of drainage cuts that provided concealment from direct observation while maintaining her general direction toward the ridge position. Halfway through the movement, Hayes encountered evidence that fundamentally changed her understanding of the enemy operation. Hidden beneath a rock overhang, she discovered a supply cache that contained equipment clearly manufactured in Russia. Advanced optical devices, encrypted communication systems, specialized ammunition, and documentation written in Cyrillic script indicated that she was facing Russian Special Operations Forces rather than local insurgent fighters supported by foreign advisors. The implications were staggering. Russian Spetsnaz personnel were operating directly against American forces in Afghanistan, using tactics and equipment that suggested state-level authorization rather than deniable advisory activities. Hayes photographed the cache contents with her digital camera, documenting evidence that would revolutionize intelligence assessments about foreign involvement in the Afghan conflict. At 13:34 hours, Hayes reached her final position and began establishing observation capabilities that would allow her to monitor both enemy activities and the extraction point where American forces would arrive in 14 hours. The ridge position offered excellent concealment and multiple escape routes, but it also placed Hayes closer to enemy patrol routes. Through her rifle scope, she could observe search teams moving through terrain that would bring them within 200 meters of her location. Maintaining concealment would require absolute discipline and careful timing of any necessary movement. At 14:56 hours, Hayes observed activities that confirmed her assessment about the sophistication of the enemy operation. A Russian officer was conducting what appeared to be a tactical briefing with local personnel, using maps and communication equipment to coordinate search activities. Hayes could observe the briefing through her rifle scope, but could not determine specific details about enemy plans or procedures. However, the level of organization and the integration of foreign and local personnel indicated long-term preparation and significant resource investment. Hayes realized that her mission had evolved beyond simple counter-sniper operations. She had discovered evidence of foreign special operations, forces conducting direct action against American personnel intelligence that would have strategic implications for U.S. policy in the region. But she needed to survive the next 14 hours to deliver that intelligence to appropriate authorities. At 16:23 hours, enemy search teams began systematic sweeps of terrain that included her ridge position. Hayes observed the approaching search elements and calculated that they would reach her concealment area within 47 minutes. She faced a tactical decision between maintaining her position and risking discovery. or relocating again and exposing herself to observation during movement. Either choice carried significant risks. Hayes chose to remain in position and rely on concealment rather than movement. The decision was based on her assessment that the enemy search pattern was designed to detect movement rather than static positions, and that her camouflage techniques would be effective against casual observation if she maintained absolute stillness. The search team passed within 23 meters of Hayes' position at 1711 hours. For 12 minutes, she could hear voices speaking in Russian and local dialects as personnel moved through terrain features around her hiding place. Hayes remained motionless, controlling her breathing and heart rate to minimize any signatures that might betray her presence. The search team continued past her position without detecting her presence, but Hayes understood that her margin of safety was decreasing with each enemy patrol. The systematic search pattern would eventually cover every possible concealment site in the area. She needed to survive 8 more hours until extraction, but enemy pressure was increasing steadily. At 1847 hours, Hayes detected communications that indicated enemy awareness of American extraction procedures. Using her Russian language training from advanced military education, Hayes was able to understand fragments of radio transmissions that suggested enemy forces were preparing to ambush her extraction. References to American helicopter and 0300 hours indicated that enemy intelligence had compromised the extraction timeline and location. Hayes realized that she needed to warn the extraction team about the planned ambush, but any radio transmission would reveal her position to enemy direction-finding equipment. She faced a choice between personal survival and the safety of the aircrew who would attempt her rescue. At 1934 hours, Hayes made her decision. She activated her emergency beacon and transmitted a brief warning message. Base Reaper 6. Extraction compromised. Enemy forces in position. Recommend abort mission. The transmission lasted 8 seconds, long enough to convey essential information, but short enough to minimize exposure to enemy tracking systems. Hayes immediately relocated 150 meters from her transmission point, moving as rapidly as possible while maintaining concealment. The response to her warning came 23 minutes later. Reaper 6, base copies your transmission. Extraction proceeding is scheduled. Maintain position for pickup. Hayes understood that higher headquarters was either unable to abort the extraction mission or unwilling to abandon her despite the tactical risks. The helicopter crew would attempt the pickup regardless of enemy opposition, following military protocols that prioritize personnel recovery over operational security. At 2,156 hours, Hayes began final preparations for what would likely become a running battle rather than a routine extraction. She positioned herself to provide overwatch of the extraction point while maintaining escape routes that would allow movement if the situation became untenable. Her ammunition was limited to 37 rounds, sufficient for precision engagement but inadequate for sustained combat against superior numbers. Hayes also prepared demolition charges that would destroy sensitive equipment if capture became imminent. The charges were positioned to eliminate her rifle, communication gear, and photographic evidence of the Russian supply cache materials that could not be allowed to fall into enemy hands. As midnight approached, Hayes settled into final observation mode and began the most dangerous phase of her mission. The extraction attempt would occur in 3 hours, providing enemy forces with a predictable target and timeline for ambush operations. Hayes needed to survive the next 180 minutes while providing whatever support she could for the helicopter crew that was risking their lives to bring her home. But she had also accomplished something that no one at Forward Operating Base Blackwater had anticipated. She had gathered intelligence about foreign special operations forces that would fundamentally change American understanding of the conflict in Afghanistan. The quiet success of her surveillance mission had revealed threats and capabilities that would require new strategies and policies to address, whether she survived the extraction or not. Hayes had already achieved strategic success that would influence American military operations for years to come. The only question remaining was whether she would live to deliver her intelligence personally or whether it would be recovered from her equipment after her death. The final hours of the mission were about to begin. The extraction helicopter arrived at 0247 hours, 30 minutes ahead of schedule. Chief Warrant Officer Martinez approached from the south, flying without navigation lights through mountain passes. Hayes heard the rotors before she saw the aircraft, their distinctive beat echoing off canyon walls that announced American presence to every enemy listening post in the valley. Through her rifle scope, Hayes observed muzzle flashes erupting from 3 positions simultaneously. The ambush had been perfectly coordinated, with Russian-trained marksmen engaging the helicopter from concealed firing points. Tracer rounds streaked through the darkness, creating geometric patterns of death against the star-filled sky. Martinez demonstrated why he had been selected for special operations support. Instead of attempting to reach the designated landing zone, he immediately gained altitude and began evasive maneuvers that forced enemy gunners to track a rapidly moving target through complex terrain. Hayes made her final tactical decision of the mission. She abandoned her concealed position and began engaging enemy firing points with precision rifle fire. Her first shot eliminated a Russian sniper at 634 meters, disrupting the coordinated ambush pattern. Her second shot forced another gunner to take cover, providing Martinez with the opening he needed. The helicopter settled into a hover 50 meters from Hayes' position. She sprinted across open ground while enemy fire erupted around her, bullets striking stone and whining off into the darkness. She reached the helicopter as Martinez began pulling power for immediate departure. Hayes dove through the cargo door. As the aircraft lifted off, enemy tracer fire following their ascent until the helicopter disappeared into the maze of mountain ridges. The extraction had succeeded, but barely. During the flight back to Forward Operating Base Blackwater, Hayes transmitted her intelligence findings to higher headquarters using encrypted communication systems. The revelation that Russian Spetsnaz forces were conducting direct operations against American personnel created immediate reactions throughout the command structure. The debriefing lasted 14 hours and involved personnel from levels of classification that Hayes had never previously encountered. Her photographs of Russian equipment and tactical observations were analyzed by specialists who understood the strategic implications of her discoveries. The most significant revelation came when intelligence analysts examined her acoustic signature recordings. The experimental device that specialist Kowalski had provided proved more valuable than anyone had anticipated. Hayes' recordings contained acoustic fingerprints of weapon systems previously unknown to American intelligence services. Brennan conducted the final tactical debriefing in the same operations bunker where Hayes had originally received her mission assignment. But the atmosphere had changed fundamentally. Officers who had previously overlooked her presence now treated her with professional respect. "Sergeant Hayes," Brennan began, "your mission has provided information that will influence operations throughout this theater. The intelligence you gathered represents one of the most significant developments in our understanding of enemy activities." Hayes nodded but remained silent. She understood that her individual accomplishments were less important than the strategic intelligence she had gathered. The mission had succeeded because of patience, discipline, and the willingness to adapt. When conventional approaches proved inadequate, the enemy sniper you eliminated has been identified as Senior Lieutenant Alexei Volkov, a Russian Spetsnaz specialist with confirmed kills in multiple theaters. Your tactical approach prevented additional casualties that would have resulted from conventional counter-sniper operations. Hayes absorbed this information without visible reaction. The confirmation that she had eliminated a professional Russian special operations soldier validated her assessment of the threat level. How did you accomplish a mission that planning models suggested had minimal probability of success? Hayes thought about the question before responding. I think most people underestimate what's possible when you're willing to disappear completely. Into the mission. The enemy expected me to behave like every other American soldier they'd encountered. When I did something different, their preparations became disadvantages. 3 weeks later, Hayes received notification that her combat efficiency report had been updated to reflect successful completion of a classified special operations mission. No details were provided, no medals were awarded, no public recognition. Acknowledged her accomplishments. The official record showed only routine patrol duties and satisfactory performance ratings. Hayes understood that genuine success in special operations often remained hidden from view. The most important victories were measured not by public acclaim, but by threats eliminated, intelligence gathered, and lives saved through actions that would never be fully acknowledged. She returned to routine duties as a designated marksman, conducting security patrols that seemed mundane after her mountain experience. But she carried with her the knowledge that individual excellence could triumph over impossible odds, that innovation could overcome institutional limitations, and that patience could defeat superior force. Hayes' story became part of the institutional memory that would guide future operations, though her name would never appear in official histories. She had demonstrated that the greatest victories often belong to those who accomplish the impossible while remaining invisible, who find success through patience rather than aggression. In the end, her mission succeeded not because she was the loudest voice or the fastest gun, but because she was willing to disappear completely into the landscape and wait 72 hours for the moment when precision mattered more than power. That lesson would outlive any individual recognition, influencing soldiers who would face their own impossible missions in distant mountains, where patience becomes a weapon and silence becomes strength. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.